Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments, everybody. Okay, I have an echo on my own system here, so bear with me. How's that? That's better. Okay, sorry about that. I had two StreamYard things open at the same time for some reason. I was trying to go live and it wouldn't let me go live because I didn't have enough space, so I had to free up space. And then anyway, hey. So no intro tonight, just bang, I'm here. So good evening, everybody. And welcome to Man's Model Moments, a midweek model meet. So a quick look who we have in chat. We got Go For It Painting, Modeling with Mike, David Markey, Edouard Williams, Gremlins Modeling Mayhem. We've got Pete McDubs, Graham Ball. There's Ball, isn't it? Yes. The contrast on this is not great, actually. It's because I've got a light here, because with having the light up there, if I don't have the light in front of me, it gets just the contrast is too high. So I look like I'm doing a reverse, torchlight spookfest kind of thing. Anyway, it just makes the contrast a bit difficult between the two. I wonder if I can change actually the background. I probably can. I won't do it right now. Anyway, I was going through. We got Casey. We've got Adrian Hook. We have Julian Hall. We have Mark Starch. Good evening, everyone. Stuart. We have, just going down, the Little Things Junkie. We've got Keith. We've got Phil. We have Graham McRobert. Good evening, Marius Saliba. Good to see you. I'm going to have to change that background, I'm on dark mode. So you get two modes in StreamYard. You get normal and you get dark mode. And I've had it on dark mode because I quite like a dark background and then text on top. But with the contrast with the light, it's really difficult to see anything. So apologies that I'm delaying things a little bit. Greg57, good to see you. We've got John Alex Scale Modeling. John, if you want to pop in tonight, it's the usual link, which you already have. Good to have you on. We've got Dave Fairclough. And if anybody is missed, I do apologise. Again, I'm going through, trying to get everybody. Steve London, British Air Support GB, who says, could you following my account? I too make models. So I will check you out and do that. Andy Freeman, good to see you. Thumbus Uppus. That's the Roman way of supporting the channel. We've got Steve's Gaming. We have Nick Johnson. Good to see you guys. We've got World War II Scale Models Dave. Good evening to you, sir. Great supporter of the channel. James Canahan. And I'm pretty much up to... Oh, and we've got Moreton Bay Modeling as well. So, good evening, everybody. I am drinking Perlenbacher 0%. Something made possible, of course, by science and technology. You can see I have my swanky new gamer chair. I got this because my other chairs... so I was just sitting in a dining room chair, which wasn't good. Wasn't good for my back. And my other chairs I've got don't have any lumbar support, whereas this does. It also has this little adjustable neck thingy. So it's great. And I do spend most of my time either sitting here or sitting at the shop. I'll probably get one of these for the shop as well. This is actually one of the cheapest ones you can get on Amazon. It got really good reviews, but you can never really tell, can you? So I ordered just one to start with. I think it was $79.95, something like that. Because the sort of standard gamer chairs start around 120, I think. And office chairs in general, around about £100. We've had an office chair before, like a massage office chair, and it was horrible. So Maria got it for when she was working at home, around about, I think it was actually during lockdown. And it was just really, really hard. And the massaging didn't really work very well. So this is great by comparison. So that's good. That's a good thing. And yes, Helen Backer, made possible by science and technology, which is the subject of tonight's discussion. As always, guys, if you have a question or a comment, if you've got a question, put question or QQQ in capitals so that I can pick it out from the chat. Especially when I'm by myself, it's difficult sometimes to do stuff. I might miss stuff if I'm not looking deliberately at the chat. I do go back and look at the chat from time to time just to make sure I'm not missing things. Tonight, I'm also streaming on Facebook and on Twitch. So this is a bit of an experiment. I haven't actually got rid of StreamYard as a service yet because it enables me to do that to start with. I'm going to give it a bit of a reprieve for a little while, just till I get more au fait with OBS. I think it's OBS. OBS Studios? Yeah, I think so. But anywho, question there from Brian. Any progress on the Color app? Yes, indeed there is. I shall be showing you guys that a little bit this evening. And for those of you who are interested in beta testing that, I'm actually going to be rolling out the beta test version to members, to channel members, probably in about a week or so's time, because I have to work out how to make an executable out of it and to distribute it, which will probably be through the Discord server for members. So if you do fancy being a part of that beta test, so to start with, it will just be basically ICM paints. There are some other paints in there. Whether we'll include that on the beta test, I don't know. There's still some discussion to be had on actually what that looks like. So we will see. Oh, Casey just sent Alex a new version like 20 minutes ago. Oh no, that means that my version is going to be out of date. But I should check that out, Casey. Quick update on other things. I've got a whole bunch of videos I'm working on. I'm aware that my posting schedule, I try to get one out a week. I haven't managed that over the last week or so. I'm actually, being at the shop actually helps edit a lot of stuff. So I've been making 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 paint mixing videos this week, just over in the last couple of days, actually. So I promised that I would do US colors next and look at the Pacific Theatre. So I was actually planning to do 2, right, with the US, to do US Pacific colors and US European theatre, because obviously the US was involved in the Pacific Theatre first, and then came into Europe. Really didn't get into Europe until 1942. With all of the mobilization and everything. Despite the kind of length of time, the US was actually horribly unprepared for war in 1941. So much so that, I mean, if you go back to when it was doing its original trials, like its tank trials, they didn't have enough tanks to actually do the exercises with. They had trucks with tank painted on the side of them. It was a bit better in 1941, but obviously the US scaled up massively and no other country in the world at the time was able to do that. And again, that was made, and always is. We've seen it in the war of Ukraine, enabled by the rapid progression of technology that happened during the war. But I was originally planning, do the Pacific first, because that's the first theatre that, and obviously the last theatre that the US was involved in, and then do the European or kind of forces next, which kind of naturally splits into US Navy, and then the US Army Air Corps, which then of course became the US AAF as well as the Army. Kind of has a natural split, not completely. It's not a completely clean split. But then when I looked into it, you would have thought, right, the US, and I say this in the video because I've been writing scripts for it, obviously. You would have thought the US would have got its S together, right? By the time 1941 came around and it was dragged into the war. Because, the war in Europe had been going on for 2.5 years before that. The writing was on the wall for quite a long time before the war actually kicked off. So a lot of time to get its shit together, right? What a mess US got. I mean, you think of it as just like olive drab and neutral grey, and then like 3-tone in the Pacific. Oh my God. So the first video I'm doing is just on US interior colours. That gives you an idea of how messed up the US colours are. So the first one will actually be on interior colours, and then I'll do the US Navy and the US Air Force, US AAF. So there'll be 3 videos on that. So I've been working on that. I've done all the colours. It's a nice little spread. Lots of greens, lots of blues, and some of the surprising colours as well. So that'll probably, well, a lot of it depends on references, right? So doing the research references, I've got 3 books which I've left at the shop today because I've been going through them. The Squadron Signal books. Dana Bell is one of the big references back in the 80s who did a lot of that. So yeah. So zinc chromate is an interesting one. Apart from being zinc chromate, of course, is incredibly toxic. It's really, really nasty. A lot of the problems with the US colors are the US didn't actually specify a lot. There were these kind of directives given out, but then everybody just did what they wanted. And, if you think of the Germans, they were quite surprisingly Nazi about, sticking to their standards. Who would have thought a fascist organization would have been like that? But, if your RLM02 wasn't right, then, okay, you might not got put up against a wall, but your stuff would be rejected, right? So everything was RLM02 or RLM66 when they switched over. Not so with the US. It's just like, yeah, it's interesting. I'll save it for the video, but there's a lot there. So, let me just scroll back a little bit because I saw quite a few comments going through there. Okay, I think I have got the question. Alex, has there ever been a kit you really wanted but could never find it to buy? I'm going to pause that question. So I will star a lot of these and come back to them. Excited about new app, Alex. Have some history in the area of color measurements in the textile industry. Yeah, and to be honest, textile, print industry, to a large extent, well, if you're involved in sort of video production, film production, color production, anything to do with monitors, color balance monitors, and all that kind of stuff, you'll also have, ideas of that. But then it's kind of just a free-for-all, for a lot of things. And paint companies, surprisingly, are, especially in the modeling sphere, quite bad. I think. Any news on the ICM Hampton? I do not have any insider knowledge on that, but it's not going to be until November, I believe. I think ICM have already stated that. I think they did when I think it's September to November time. It's a late 2025 production, that one. So I won't start that one because I don't have anything extra to tell you there. Sorry, Nick. So British Airport, just remember, I caught this one, but just remember, if you put question in capital letters or QQQ in capitals, it just helps me to pick these out. I will star your question and come back to it. Just going down. Have any of you seen the Igor Duchik books on German camo? Easy to answer that, Marie. No. So as the former video said, we used the Thomas Chory books, which I'm probably pronouncing horribly. They have paint chips in, which, you know, it's the best way to be able to get data if a book has paint chips in, because otherwise you're down to the vagaries of print production, you know. And print production isn't necessarily, well, almost never certainly properly color matched, you know, because it becomes a lot more expensive. That's interesting. I saw somewhere today that Canada declared war on Japan as the first country after Pearl Harbor attack. Well, it is the 51st state of America, right? If you listen to certain orange orangutan type people. Interestingly enough, I had a Canadian customer coming in. It was their last full day in the UK. They're flying back from Heathrow tomorrow. Popped into the shop, a man and his daughters bought a couple of kits. So, yeah, they have no interest in being the 51st state of America, funnily enough. Question from Julian. Alex, will you be doing paint bundles? Put my teeth back in. Paint bundles in the shop for the US colors? Yes. So I actually need to order more ICM paints now. I'm getting low on several colors. But yeah, I will put together bundles that will go out at the same time as the video is normal. Oh, that's a very technical question, James Carnahan. What illuminant are you using, Alex, for color matching? So these are all D65. I think it's all standard. Casey can answer it a little bit more technically, I guess. But it's the standard kind of D65 illuminant that you would get in pretty much any color matching. D65, I believe, is the standard, and then you have, I mean, there are other standards, but it's the most widely used one, I believe. Oh, there we go. There we go. D65 and 10 degrees observer. So there we go. Just going down. So I used to work for a company, actually. This is one of my typical segues. I used to work for a company called Shimadzu. They're a Japanese company. You may not have heard of them. You will have seen the symbol of Shimadzu because it is the Satsuma symbol used on pottery, and that goes back to way back when I can't remember the guy's name. Might have been Hideo Shimadzu, but anyway, he was granted the privilege of being able to use the Satsuma symbol after doing something for samurai or something like that. way back, because when I was employed by them, I worked for them for 5.5 years, and I was watching the Antiques Roadshow, and this guy was just like, oh yes, you can tell this is Satsuma ware because of the Shimadzu symbol. And I'm like, what? It's just a circle with a cross in it. But I worked for them for about 5.5 years. I was in the analytical part, so I was LC, GC, GCMS, LCMS. That stands for liquid or gas chromatography with mass spectrometry on the end of it, and non-mass spectrometric detection as well. So we also had so it was an analytical company. It's got its fingers in lots of pies, like a lot of Japanese companies. But the main part of the piece we were in was analytical. And one part of it is spectroscopy. There's a huge spectroscopy thing, and they do all kinds of stuff. They also do things like total organic carbon in water. So it's a water quality testing thing. Flat panel display equipment, so if you've used a phone or a monitor, that monitor or phone has probably at some time been tested with a piece of Shimadzu equipment in the factory in which it was made. But yeah, they did a huge amount of spectroscopy there, and material testing, like hardness testing and things. Shame I didn't get to swipe some of those spectroscopy pieces of equipment before I left. The thing is, it's expensive, right? The piece of kit that I was in charge of, standard LC is about 30 grand, or was about 30 grand at the time. So, and a mass spec can be anything from 65 to name your number. We did a moldy TOF, a mass-assisted laser desorption time of flight instrument. Basically, it looks like a Coke dispenser, like one of those big upright soda machines. They were about £300,000, I think, something like that. But they could do really interesting things, really cool stuff. But sadly, don't have any of that now, and it's a bit beyond my means. James says, my first Spectro I used was back in the 80s, digital hard with a huge 20 megabyte hard drive. Wow. Question, if you buy a full set of ICM paints, will you send mixing charts with them? It was my intent to put mixing charts, but that means I've got to print them all out and all of that. I'll probably just refer people to videos and do PDF copies, just because I can claim it's greener, which it is, but it's also much more easy to manage. But the short answer is yeah. It's there's no issue with any of that. For a full set, and the reason, of course, well, no, roll back. So when I'm making the videos, 15 colors with 12 paints. Part of that, and 12 of the cheapest paints that you can buy, which are good quality. Okay. Not the best paints you can buy overall. A lot of artist paints are better, but ICM has a really good range. Good color density, good coverage, good general properties. It's a good all-rounder without being too obscure or inaccessible. Yeah. So the individual paints sell for £1.80 each. All right. You get a bundle, it's less than that. So you're not spending much to get a very wide variety of paints. Even if the bundles are slightly less than £180 each. But if you're buying 12 paints at £180, £21.60, so I think the bundle sells 20, right? So 12 paints. Sorry, what am I doing? So if you're getting 15 colors, right? Hang on, there we go. So you're getting 15 colors for £20. That's about £1.35, £1.33 and a third, which doesn't work, of course, per color. Okay, and you're not limited to that. Whereas if you bought 15 colors of the correct shade, even if you're buying, say, Vallejo 250 a pop, that's almost £40, £37.50. So it's a pretty cost-effective way mixing paints. The other thing is, if I buy those Vallejo, 15 Vallejo colors, and one of those is olive drab, and olive drab was kind of one of the worst paints ever made. It was originally, there were 7 different pigments. It was made of 7 pigments, plus cadmium as a stabilizer. Cadmium, of course, became a strategic resource when war was declared. So even at the time, it was known and recognized that olive drab faded badly in different environments, and depending on manufacturer, faded differentially as well. So there was a call to simplify olive drab. They removed cadmium from the mixture as a stabilizer because it was needed in other things. Cadmium was just off the table. And so, as with a lot of things, I mean, why some of this is such a nightmare with the US, it was left to individual manufacturers of how to do that. There was no directive of just saying, right, okay, we've simplified it now to these 4 components to this recipe. They're just like, no, we want you to mix it to that color, just make it less complex. And if you can make it more color fast as well, that'd be great. So they didn't really check up. There was nobody in any of these air ministries that seemed to be going around and checking. Like I say, the Germans were very fascist about it. Quelle surprise. So yeah, it became a nightmare. So if you've got your Vallejo paint, what do you do then? Do you just take it that it's factory fresh, or do you fade it? And then how do you fade it? Because if you're adding other colors to it, if you don't understand the paint, you can get all kinds of weird, unexpected results, right? And then you can make it too green or too brown or too light or too, So if you've kind of mixed the paints and understand what is going into them, then it's quite easy to adjust. If it's a 3:2:1 ratio of something, and the 1 being, say, white or a light color, it's quite easy to make that a 3:2:2, or a 4:3:2, or 4:3:1. So it's very easy. You've got the same components. You're going to get a shade which is similar, but a little bit lighter or darker, or a little bit more green or brown. It's not going to be a massive departure. So that is part of what I would like people to take from the videos, is that actually, if you've worked with certain colors and you understand them a little bit, it's quite easy then to do a little bit more with them, to make different variations. And that's how you start elevating your models from a single flat color to something that looks more realistic, that looks more accurate. Again, all of these are in parentheses, right? So yeah, I mean, in terms of the mixing ratios, they're not meant to be a secret, quite the opposite. If people come up with better ones, that's great. The thing is, with a full range, is that gives you much more capability, right? So one video that I will do after I've done most of mine is a more general set of 12 paints that allows you to do a lot more mixing. And you might think, well, why didn't you do that one first? It's because it's kind of counterintuitive. And if you don't really have let's call it a feel, which is the opposite of scientific, right? Having said this, give you about science and technology. That gives you it allows you to develop, I think, a feeling and understanding of how these colors are working, how the pigments are working. because at the end of the day, we're talking about the base pigments that are in these paints. You know, a yellow is a yellow because it has certain pigments in it. You know, a green is green because it has a certain pigment or combination of pigments in it. And if you add one to another, that might have different results depending on what those pigments are. Now, artists understand the pigments, and a lot of artists' colors are labeled as the pigment. You know, phthalocyanine green, for instance. You know, that's a phthalocyanine. We don't do that. We just have, oh, it's olive drab, or it's RLMO2, or, you know, we don't really get into that as modelers. And I think we're kind of missing a big chunk. You know, we might do research on a lot of stuff. And not saying that you have to, but for me, I find it really interesting. I mean, I've learned so much over the past year, not about paints necessarily, but about, you know, how different nations approach this, about some of the pigments, about how they were applied, some of the history behind it, the reasons of this. Really interesting stuff, you know, and I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't got into this. So, Adrian, question. I have the ICM box of paints and I think they are great. Are there any more colors in their range? No. They have a range of 80 paints. It's actually 77 paints because 3 of those are varnishes. However, you can add to them with AK paints, okay, which are of course more expensive, but that's the raw materials basically come from Spain. So, and they're not Vallejo, so it narrows it down a bit, right? Having said that, you shouldn't really need more colors. Again, part of the whole mixing your own paints is, and again with this limited set that Casey came up with a while ago, you can actually do a huge amount. Because if you think, okay, let's rewind again. So I watch a couple of artists who talk about mixing colors, and they're doing it by eye, right? And they're matching colors by eye. Generally, they're using four colors, right? They don't tend to have this big palette that we do. They have 4 colors. They'll have a red, they'll have a yellow, they'll have a blue, and then they'll have white. That's generally what they do. White isn't a color, but you know what I mean. And then they can mix anything from that, essentially. Now, the more pigments you add, the easier it gets to mix colors. And again, rolling back a little bit, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do 12 colors in a set, to do 12 paints, do 15 colors, because it limits down. And it's actually one of the hardest bits of it, is right. How do you choose those colors? But you're choosing colors which are closer to where you want to end up, and then adding things, and then people, I think, can follow you on that journey a little bit easier. You know, if I'm adding a dark green and a light green to get a mid green, that's easy, right? If I'm adding a dark green and a yellow to get a lighter green, again, you can follow that. If I'm adding, say, clear orange, clear red, and a mid gray, and I'm coming up with like a greenish gray color, some people might look at that and go, how does that work? Right? So for me, it's a journey. And it's walking you to that, right? Rather than just saying, buy these 4 paints and mix anything. The other thing is the ratios then become more extreme, right? If I have those 4 colors, let's add in lamp black as well, or a black, you know, but say lamp black because it's a more pure black, carbon black, rather than like bone black, which has brownish kind of overtones. So we're adding a black, got white, and we've got those 3 primaries. I want to mix a really light, pale grey, bluish grey. So I'm going to end up with a massive chunk of white with a smidge of black and a smidge of blue in it. And it's really easy to screw that up, right, and get it too strong. And it's not a problem for an artist because they'll do serial mixing on a palette. So they'll just use a palette knife, mix it all up, and they'll like chunk a great chunk of it to one side, and then they'll get a little piece of that and mix it with some, a big blob of white, and they'll till they've got the color they want. That's not really what we're doing. And most modelers don't have that approach of just chucking loads of paint away because we're tight, right? We want value for money. So that's kind of the explanation of how I've taken the approach that I have up until this point, and where Casey has come in and been able to sort of back up the direction I've been going in and kind of focus that and provide all these tools and data, in a much more time efficient way than I could. I'd have probably got there, 5 years time. Maybe. The access to the equipment and the time is a massive thing, and hats off to Casey for being able to provide all of that. Hopefully what I can provide on the other side of it is getting people into that mindset and easing them into, actually some of this isn't difficult. And going back to my tools and technology piece, if you have technology to help you, then it actually becomes much easier. It acts like a wheelchair, a crutch, a support for you until you can get to the point where you don't need that, right? And that's hopefully what I'd like to impart as a legacy, if you like, that people can actually come along, look at a set of paints, start mixing, and then intuitively think, if I just add a little bit of pink to that, it'll just bring that out. I wasn't thinking that way when I started this. So when I started with the REF colors, I was looking at, how do I get azure blue? Till you get pink in there, you can't mix azure blue. It doesn't matter how much white and blue, different blues you have, and grays and things. You just don't have the capacity to get there. And it wasn't until I'd broken that down and looked at numbers and looked at it, my brain, the analytical way of looking at it, and just like, okay, I need to shift it in this way and this way. How do I do that? How do I get something that's way over there? Well, the only way is to add a purple or a pink. A purple is adding more blue as well. So you're changing, again, go back to my science background. You should only try to change one variable at a time if you can, right? When you're testing things out, you want everything to be static and then one thing to change, because then you can tell, I've changed this and this has happened. It's because you've changed that and not because you've changed this and this. Well, what's the change down to? And that's what my original cataloging of all the colors and looking at the CIE lab color space rather than RGB, which is not very fit for purpose of that, led me to, and that's when Case got in touch. And the CIE lab color space is still looking at a single point in a three-dimensional space. So it doesn't account for different illumination, different wavelengths of light, which I won't get into here. But if you're looking at a spectrum, then you can do something which, and I have to correct a former thing I said about metameric matches. And I was thinking of mimetic, the mimetic greens that the Germans talked about in theirs. So a lot of RLM 7071 are often called mimetic green. What that means is it's really a misnomer. It's one of those things. It's a name that's just been given which isn't really fit for purpose. But a metameric match for something, a metameric paint is one that looks different in different lighting conditions. And that's where this mimetic paint comes from. Because mimetic is really about mimicking. It's about, getting again, for a camouflage paint, you want it to mimic the background, right? Haze paint is a good one. Oh God, haze paint. I'm not going to start that one, but that's another US one. So you don't want metameric matches if you can get away with it, because if you look at it in different lighting, the color will look different. So ideally, you want something that matches the spectrum, not only a single point, so that that color looks the same in contrast with other colors if you are looking at it in different lighting conditions. Now, this is why you always say, ideally, you want color balanced lighting, daylight lighting, so that it mimics a normal day, so that you can look at it. You shouldn't be looking at fluorescent lights and all that kind of thing, right? Because different wavelengths interact differently in different paints and will make things look different or impart a sheen to them, because there's more green wavelengths coming out or more red or whatever. Anyway, comment, painting my weak point at the minute. Was going to try ICM and noticed you have a few small sets in your shop and may pick a couple up. Yes, I kind of misread that. Painting is your weak point at the minute, was the point you're making, right? So yeah, ICM are good paints, I think, for any beginner to try, because you're probably hand brushing if you're not a beginner, but if you're getting into painting more, that's probably a better way of putting it. They're easy to apply by brush and they cover well. And as I was saying, there are a huge number of paints out there. It's actually more important, I feel, to focus on the properties of the paint rather than the color of the paint, because provided it's got decent pigment density, you can pick up most colors, right? But if you're not happy with like how transparent the paints are, or how opaque the paint is, or it's a bit thick and lumpy, or it's too thin for you, get the paint that you're happy with working with. ICM have a good, like, middle of the road range. They're not too thick, they're not too thin. They're a reasonable price point. They've got good, they tick a lot of boxes. They might not be, the best in opacity or the best in flow or whatever, but there are 6 or 7 in everything, rather than being a 9, 9, 1, 2, 4, 7, in different categories. So, and again, I think you could get the same from AK probably as well. You're going to pay more for it. So, yeah, ICM are pretty good. One thing they're really bad at, and I've said this in my Improving ICM video, what they say is an equivalent color for something. Don't listen to that. Dark earth, they say chocolate chipping. It's nothing like dark earth. So if you ignore their advice on which colors look like which other colors, they're great paints. Which is why the mixing up comes in, right? Okay. Mort Laker. Question: can anyone recommend a video or channel which shows how the mold tools are made? I would love to see how rivets are done. Is it all spark erosion? So I don't know if there's any on actually like a modern tooling being made, but it has been mentioned. Certainly when I was at the Airfix Seeking Day. And actually, this is a really good question, that kind of moving away from paint a second. The point of this tonight, and yes, I was going to talk about the paint app, but I also want to talk about technology in model making, how it's changed from the 70s to today. And really, I'll take the 70s because nothing happened between the 50s or the 40s and the 70s, right, in terms of technology. So then, basically, you got a big block of stainless steel, and you machined that out by hand, which sounds odd, machined it out by hand. It's all manual. You'd probably be using drill presses and stuff to do the bulk of the work, and then you're carving pieces out and stuff. But that was by hand to carve those big steel tools out. Now that really changed around the 1990s to early 2000s, when CAD started to become viable, and computer-aided design meant that it's much easier to actually design the stuff. You don't have, in 3D, whereas before, of course, it was all done on technical drawing boards, with people with a lot of skill drawing everything out, and it had to be transferred by somebody to that steel tool. Once you start getting into CAD, that enables the progression to CNC machining, where a computer is reproducing a digital file. And that was really I would think the step change in terms of quality, because now a machine is making a very precise casting, and because it's all done on CNC, you can make the unions and everything absolutely perfect, right? So the introduction of CAD design and then CNC machining is one thing. To answer your question on rivets, it depends if they are inverted or not. So if they're flush riveted, i.e. they're pitted, or the company has chosen to represent them in that way, that has to be a little nubbin on the mold, because you think it's reversed, right? And that is spark welding, as they call it, which is a fairly recent development in terms of mold making. It's been around for a while, but the precision which you can do that, is sub millimeter. So you can make tiny little rivets. Obviously, tools used to be raised panel lines and raised rivets, and that's much easier, right? Because if you've got a big piece of steel, the way to make a raised panel line on that is you carve a line into it. I say it's easy, but it's steel, so it's not easy. But if you wanted to do it the other way around, then you have to machine away everything else and leave a little ridge, right? Now you don't have to, because you can spark weld that line on afterwards, or if you need to, or prior to that, you can just CNC everything so that ridge is there, which is how things are done now. So you think that also is going to lower the overall cost, because yes, the CNCs and everything are expensive. There's a big capital cost, but then running them is much cheaper than paying somebody with the skill to actually make those tools manually. So I don't know if there are any channels that show that. I'm not sure. Be worth having a look around. If you do find one, let us know, because it's a pretty cool process. I've seen it in. So I could say when I went to the Airfix Seeking Day, they showed slides of stuff, and I included some of that bit on the Seeking video, the initial Seeking Day video. But there wasn't anything kind of, definitive. I'm now quite a way behind with comments, so apologies for that. You ask me questions, I'm going to answer them. When I answer something, I will go off on tangents. So, question: does any paint manufacturer make British SCC number 13 jungle green? I'd like to know before I allow my colourblind eyes the opportunity to mix paints and plaster over an M3 Lee / Grant. Not sure. Not sure is my honest answer. To be honest, I don't look for specific paints anymore. So it's not until I actually do research for a video that I really find out what colours either I'm going to use or I need, and then I'll mix it. So I'm not the right person to ask right now. How will accurate color matches relate to the scale of subject we are modeling, as this will alter the correct shade to use? That is a good question, Graham. It's Graham Ball. Yes, I did say Ball, not Bell. It uses a different, interesting, just a thing on StreamYard. So where is it? Here, where your name is, Graham, it has an A in the old-fashioned manner. What is? I don't know what the name of that is. I'm sure somebody here will. Whereas in the comments, sorry, everything's backwards on StreamYard. In the comments over here, where your name is, it's using the basic O with a stick style. So also it's a lot smaller font and it's in dark. So it's with my light next to it. So the contrast is odd. So much easier to see this A on the screen here rather than on the side. So, but it's an interesting question, and it's one actually I want to, because a lot of people say that that effect doesn't exist. It's all what they call enhanced contrast, depending on what you're looking at and stuff. But there is a physics piece behind it about, well, one is number of photons falling on a subject, specular diffusion, like light traveling through air and all kinds of stuff. Rather than me, and it's funny you asked the question today, actually, because I was looking at this today. So rather than actually try and blather my way through it, I'm actually just photographing a black painted panel at different distances and going, as usual, I'm going to try and show it by science what the effect is and then give you some actual recommendations based on that, rather than just trying to say, because some people will say, oh, shove 20% white in. It's like, well, okay, is that going to work? Now, I will say with well, let's leave it at that. There are other things that I'm thinking of, which I will wait for the data to inform my decision on, right? But yeah, you're right. Okay. Okay. Lots of discussion on some technical aspects. Oh, we need that pink, indeed. A few more people in the popping into chat. Welcome, people. Wow. BP, welcome. My last office chair bought by my corporation cost £800. They didn't let me keep it for some reason. That's terrible, isn't it? Yeah, company property, I suppose they claimed. That's a very good point. So none of the paint matches that we're going to be looking at look at the infrared, because exactly as Casey said, people don't look at models with infrared. You might look at the actual subject in infrared, absolutely, especially if you're doing a lot of fight. Although these days it's more likely you're going to be using image intensifiers. But yeah, there are certain lengths that we probably won't go to. Nick, just asking, I'm devil's advocate. I get your scientific background, but does accurate scale, correct color fidelity really matter to the average Joe model? It works for me if it looks okay. It's a perfectly valid point, Nick. And I would say yes and no. I'm going to use my usual. I must get this on a T-shirt or a mug or something. It depends, right? So, what do you get pleasure out of modeling with? If you're just going to paint something and you just want to buy, NATO black number 42 from range X and spray your Black Hawk in it or whatever, and you're happy with that, more power to you. I would never argue with that. I would never say that model looks wrong, unless somebody asked me, I've done my model in this, what do you think of it? Could you, tell me what I could improve about the color or whatever? Then I wouldn't say anything, because it's your model. You do what you like with it and what you're happy with. And if it's made you happy, then it's achieved its point. However, for me personally, I would like to try and make my models look not necessarily accurate, but I want to feel that I've started from a place of close to where the subject is or was realistically, and I go from there. So having, and especially if you're looking at a subject that you don't know well, like what is olive green? What is dark olive drab? Are you going to, let me put it a different way. If I paint my model with the 6 Vallejo paints or whatever that I bought for it, I look at it and think, there's something about it that just doesn't quite look right. Where do I start to correct that? And I don't know, right? Because I don't know what doesn't look right. I just know overall it somehow doesn't work, and that would annoy me, especially because I put a lot of time and effort into that model. So I think the best thing with any sphere of life really is if you've got the tools to help you do what you want to do, that's good, right? And this is a tool. It isn't, these aren't the 10 commandments, for instance. Nothing is written in stone here. This is just saying, here is something that can help you mix colors mix paints from, a variety of different manufacturers within there, not between them, but within the manufacturers, to create a particular shade that you're looking for. Either because you've got a whole bunch of paints, you don't want to go out and buy more when you could potentially just, have I got what I need to make something better here? Or you feel that something's a bit wrong with, the Panzer Grey you've just painted. Could you get something which is, I need it to look a bit lighter. What I've got these paints, how can I make that a bit lighter and still make it look like that German grey? It's a bit like, I've got a bunch of wood outside, because we've got a wood burner. I've also got a handsaw. I could cut that wood with a handsaw. I could cut it with an axe. I could make an axe out of a stone and a piece of wood and cut it. I use a table saw. And I use a table saw because it's quick. It requires almost zero effort. And I have it. It makes my life easy. I can go out and cut 3 pieces of wood into the right shape in about 30 seconds and then put them on the fire, rather than spending half an hour and potentially cutting off part of my body with an axe, when it's raining. So the app is a tool, and if it can help some people to actually improve what their models look like, improve their modeling experience, improve the way that they understand paints. And I mean, if you use the app, say for 3 months, and after a while you just get the hang of it, if you like, it's a bit like having training wheels on your bike, and then you don't need the app anymore. That's great, right? I would be super, super happy if a handful of people got in touch in a year's time and said, you know what, that app that Casey mostly developed really helped me to get into painting in a way that I didn't before. I'd be ecstatic. I think that would be fantastic. So, and the same way, if after a year nobody's used it and it's just like, yeah, it's interesting, but it's not for me. It's like, okay, well, that's it. I'm still going to use it. So it really is, you pays your money and you takes your choice, right? I think the other big thing is, as Marcus said, if you're colorblind, which it's a catch-all phrase for people that don't see color in the regular way, in the normal distribution curve there on the outskirts, yeah, the smaller percentage of the population that see colors differently because of different structures in their eyes. It will help them to create colors that they know will be about right, probably more right than a lot, for their models, for others to view, right? So I think that again is a great thing, right? They can have confidence rather than thinking, did I add red or green there, and not be quite sure because it looks similar in their eye. So again, it's not a I guess I'm applying this a bit like the US paint manufacturers rather than the World War II German ones. Just putting it out there. What people do with it is up to them. I'm not coming around with a clipboard saying that ain't right, that ain't right. That's not the sort of person I am, But it's a good question, really good question. Comment, I hope your wheelchair has better brakes than mine. No brakes on my wheelchair, Julian. Dear. Let me see. Just getting up to present day with comments. While I'm just scrolling through here, there's a lot of people coming in saying hello and stuff. Apologies if I haven't said hello to you already. Hello, if you've just joined. So in terms of widening this out a little bit again to technology in general, there are a few, again, lynch point technologies, I think, that have changed because in the past 50 years, let's say. So one of them is consumer electronics, right? So the paint app that we've been talking about a little bit here would not have been possible if it wasn't for consumer electronics, right? The fact that, if in 1980 you try to do the sorts of things that Casey and I have been doing now, even just like the color measurement app, right? The little thing which is at the shop at the moment, little handheld device that can give you, not like scientifically spec'd accurate color measurements, but good enough for 99% of applications. Good color checker would be costing thousands of pounds, probably actually well out of the reach of most people, if not all people, if such a thing existed. I'm not sure a handheld version did. You'd probably actually have to go bigger because it was more solid state back then, right? So it wasn't until the advent of consumer grade electronics and the shrinking down of the transistor, microprocessors, and the whole programming revolution that followed that has enabled huge changes in our lives. The fact that I'm talking to you guys here is evidence of that. I've got a couple of monitors here, flat monitors, which before, even 25 years ago would have been massive CRT things, which would have been expensive, heavy, and hot. Plus, they'd be bombarding me with, cast-off X-rays, which probably wouldn't be great. So consumer grade electronics and all the software that goes with that, Excel, I live and die by Excel. It's such a useful tool for so many things. Yeah, you can do all of that stuff as well in paper sheets, but then I couldn't save it to a cloud drive and use it wherever I go, which is what I do, So when I'm here, yeah, I'm 2 minutes from the shop. I could take a stack of papers with me. But also if I could drive off to Birmingham tonight and visit somebody and have the same file, Massive, massive change. That together with the whole CAD piece, that is all software that enabled that super accurate tool making and democratized that a little bit more. Now, of course, the actual production of plastic is still hugely expensive, right? Because at the end of the day, you still have to press 2 massive stainless steel blocks together and inject plastic at them at into them at high temperature and pressure. So, that part hasn't changed much until a few years ago when there's a company called Ceocast that will now actually, I could, for instance, if I wanted to make a model of this, right, just this, say this is a model I have made. Actually, let's use this because this is actually a model, right? If you recognize it's from the Airfix one, so one of the Airfix Tiger ones. But I could send this to Ceocast and ask them to make a mold of it. So probably, obviously, sense to it. But I could ask them to make a mold of this. Obviously, you can't because this is copyrighted with Airfix and everything. But say I had designed one, 3D printed it in resin stuff. I could send it to them. They would make a mold of it, and then I can get them to run off, 5,000 of those in their Ceocast resin, which is it's not a resin. It is a plastic, but it's not a thermoplastic like polystyrene. It's kind of a bridge between resin casting, which came around kind of the 90s in popularity, and injection molding. If they could do that find a way of polymerizing polystyrene at lower temperatures, not having to do the whole thermoplastic thing, that would be good. Those machines are a lot less. They are in the tens of thousands, not the millions of the big things. So again, smaller runs, mold making available to, I'll say the general public, but really it's small companies. And there are companies now with Ceocast machines or set up Ceocast machines and spin molding for metal and 3D printers that will cater to pretty much anybody's, requirements. Sorry, I've just seen the man's model moments modeling mixing monstrosity. That's too much of a mouthful even for me. So that is one part of it. Then you have the whole 3D printing revolution, which has really been only in the past 15 years, I'd say, which is probably how long I've been 3D printing. From something that was very much a tinkerer's hobby, you needed quite a lot to make a 3D printer work reliable. Well, not reliably, but semi-reliably, let's say. You had to tinker with it. You had to level the bed each time manually and 3D print parts for the 3D printer to make it more stable and stuff. I did all kinds of things to my original 3D printer to make it kind of work. Whereas now you can just buy an Ender 3 clone, which has auto bed leveling, heated bed, filament out extraction, all this kind of stuff, multi-filament printing, for a reasonable amount of money as well, a few £100. Now that isn't going to be producing this type of quality, but for a couple of £100 you can buy a resin printer which can produce better quality than this, albeit in a really messy, stinky way, because resin printing is kind of where PLA, filament printing was 15 years ago. It's kind of in that infancy stage, I would say. It's not consumer level yet, in the way that PLA printing kind of is. Mark just said, going back a little to the app piece. I'm red-green colorblind. However, I also mix up pinks and greys. I owned a silk shirt which I thought was black. After 5 years, I was told it was dark green. Yeah. So there's a lot of misinformation about color blindness. And again, it's really different color visions. And there are ways of making, if you look at infographics, for instance, because we did a whole thing on this about what colors we were going to choose for I can't remember what it was, some piece of software with different warnings and things. You don't choose like red, green, and yellow, for instance, because and blue, because those you're just going to mess. If you want to try and capture the most number of colorblind different types and get them to mix things up, that's the way to do it. But if you see things which are like a cyan and then like a more pinkish red, there are different shades which are not approved for use, but there is a website that you can go on and get basically the highest contrast for the most people kind of palettes, which is quite cool. Because it is about the ability to distinguish nearby shades, right? And what is nearby, and it's different for people who have different structures in their eyes. So Graham McRoberts says, okay, thanks. I'm going to get a 3D printer soon, but don't know which one to go for to do 1/6 scale printing. So 1/6 scale is big, right? It depends what you want to do. Generally, the price of a printer is directly proportional to its bed volume, how big a thing it can print. The bigger thing you can print, the more expensive the printer will be. Also, the more likely something is to go wrong in that time. If you want to print, say, 1/6 scale figures, that's going to be, there's different ways to do that. You can do it all in one, or you can do like it in structures, substructures, depending on where you're getting your files from. So it's not it's one of those it depends answers. I mean, there are some very good filament printers now, which actually 1/6 scale, they might be good enough for that, because you can also do things like acetone smoothing on PLA, but on ABS plastic. So it's not as simple a question as it might appear. I would say, as Adrian has said, look on YouTube video for top 5 best budget 3D printers of 2025 or something. But bear in mind the size part of it. Let me just go back to some of the original questions that were posted before we carry on. So I'll take this one first from Simon's Modeling Shed. Question, what do you think about Airfix's release of the Jaguar? So if you didn't see Airfix and Chill on Monday, Dale was on there from Airfix talking about some of this. I think it's great. I think, as I said on Monday, I think Airfix had a good kind of feel about what people want at the moment. Not 100% of the time. They're not going to be able to produce everything, obviously. But if you think about some of the kits that they've made recently that have been well received and well lauded and sold well, I guess it really starts with the 1/24 scale Spitfire. Yes, it's a Spitfire, but they ticked all the right boxes with that, right? It was detailed. It was the most popular Mark 9, more Mark 9s produced than any others. They had some really good schemes, including Johnny Johnson's aircraft, top fighter race of the RAF, of course. You had the gun bays, you had the guns, the Hispanos, you had the full engine, you had a really nice cockpit. So out of the box, it builds into a lovely kit. Regardless of whether you like the Spitfire or not, it's a good kit, right? And this isn't the first one they've done, but I'm just talking about the last couple of years. Obviously, they've done the Wildcat and other stuff before that, but last couple of years, if you think about how they've been sort of toddling along, the Seeking, it was a surprise to everybody. I didn't give a damn about the Seeking when I went to Airfix's Seeking Day, but the enthusiasm and the way that they had designed that kit really, was infectious, and it's a really nice kit. I really enjoyed making it, regardless of the fact it was not a subject I'd ever really thought I would do. The Gannet, very similar. Gannet's one of those fugly planes, right? It's so ugly, it's kind of beautiful. But it's interesting. It's got really great detail. It's got a lot of stuff in that box. It's pretty good value for money, that Gannet kit. People talk about Airfix prices creeping up and stuff. It's like, I get that, but look at that Gannet. Look at a comparably priced Tamiya kit, and then tell me that kit isn't good value for money. Then build it, and then tell me it's not good value for money, because it goes together beautifully. It's really well engineered, really nice kit. The Lysander, again, I could go on. The Avro Anson probably is the first actually of the ones from this period, because that predated the Spitfire, and probably would have been, as Moss has said, kit of the year hadn't it not been for the Spitfire. The Buccaneer, I believe, is a really nice kit. I've not built that kit yet. Buccaneer is a big old bird. So I do have Airfix's, what's it, late 90s, early 2000s one. So I might do both and compare them. But maybe that's a 2026 project. I've got a lot on at the moment. So they seem to have their finger on the pulse of a current thread of the modeling community. The Ferret, again, underrepresented, very popular, quite a simple model. It's not perfect, but out of the box, it builds up really nicely. And if you're not really bothered about tiny inaccuracy bits, you're good. And if you are, it's a solid base to be able to super detail, to be able to correct those things, to be able to go full on it, and it's 20 quid. It's like, so the Jaguar, if they do the same treatment, which from all the CAD I've seen, from the finished models that Airfix have teased so far, if they're doing the same thing with the Jaguar, which hasn't had a really good 1/48 scale rendition of it, I don't think. I think it's great. I thought they would do it last year. They were obviously making it last year. So again, that comes to that finger on the pulse thing. They kind of knew what people wanted. If only the real Jaguar knew what people wanted, rather than the awful rebranding that they did. So yeah, I think it's a really good release. Again, I thought it would be last year. I was a year off. I don't think that really matters. Means I didn't get the point in our Beyond the Box episode, but hey ho. Next question, along that same sort of line. British Exporter, I pre-ordered the space shuttle, but my real question is, what do you think of the new kit? What do you mean, the Artemis? Because the space shuttle, of course, the Airfix space shuttle is not new. It's their prior molding. I think the Artemis is great. And funny enough, Revell are doing one as well. It's funny that, isn't it? So, there's an obvious YouTube video in that straight away, isn't it? When I saw that Revell were doing one as well, it's just like, well, let's race them. Put them side by side. As I'm doing at the moment, I've just built the old Airfix Eurofighter 1/72 scale gift set. I've just done that. I've recorded that footage this week. And I have to say, I think the old kit is easier to build. I don't think their new starter set is an improvement on the build. It's far superior in terms of accuracy, in terms of detail, looks great, but it's harder to make. It's harder to make that old kit. As a beginner's kit, the old kit, I would say, is better. If you've got a few kits under your belt, you're interested in accuracy, then yeah, the new one wins out 100%. But that's not how it's being marketed. So I think the title of the video will probably be something like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, something like that, you know. But for the Artemis, all good. You know, I think including that base with it is good. You know, somewhere to put it. Undoubtedly, somebody, either aftermarket or 3D printer, will come up with a launch tower for it as well, which I think will look awesome. Space shuttle was part of my childhood. I've never really been interested in building one. I think principally because some of the prior kits haven't been that good. You know, I don't know. Not seen the Airfix one built, so I'm not sure. Anyway, if that's what you meant, I think the Artemis is good. Spatial they're releasing is just a re-release, so you know, I don't really know the old Airfix kit. If that's not what you meant, again, just let me know in the comments. Steve's Gaming said, Alex, has there ever been a kit you really wanted but could never find it to buy? Yes. Well, there have been subjects. So I've been a kit that I specifically wanted that I haven't been able to buy. I'm not sure. I would love, but again, it's not a mainstream injection molded kit. I'd love a really good kit of the Liberator, the Blake 7 Liberator, because that is the best sci-fi starship ever, in my opinion. In terms of actual kit, recently, the ones I would really like to build are the Airfix birds. Now, I did find a couple of bullfinches, the bullfinch kit at Telford, which I have 90% built, maybe 80% built. Kind of got put on hold when we moved house, but that will be coming out at some point. I'm not giving any specifics at the moment. I'd love to do the Kingfisher. I think they did a spotted woodpecker. I think that would be good as well. The dinosaurs I'd like to do, but you know, it's they're not kind of like ones I would super desire. The NPC Hawk I wanted to do, but I've done that now. So I think the trouble is, with a global market, with eBay as it was, I mean, it's still around, but it's not like it was. But I also know people in other countries and things. So if there's a kit that I really want, chances are I could probably find it. And if I'm prepared to pay enough for it, I could probably get it. So yeah, it's more that subject side of things. I would love to do the Liberator. I don't think anybody really makes a really good injection molded kit of it. They tend to be limited run or, you know, resin and other bits. And then I'm thinking, well, I could just 3D print one. You know, I've got the capacity to do that now. But it's still not quite the same as doing a kit, you know. So, good question though. It's makes you get you thinking, Cap, and I like questions like that. I'm just scrolling back up because I have missed a whole bunch of comments while I've been talking there. There we go. To Mark Stott's comment. I can go from there. Ah, okay, there we go. So bamboo lab printer does enough quality for Casey on 1/6 scale figures. So you can, I mean, again, it comes down to filament printers now actually can do extremely good prints. The problem is time. And for a 1/6 scale figure, that's a lot of time. One of the great things I like about resin printing is you get really good detail and it can be pretty fast because you're using. So, for those of you who don't know, a filament printer basically uses a nozzle and it goes out, it traces all the bit that you're printing, and then it goes and it raises up a bit and then goes around and does it all again, and raises up a bit and goes. And that amount it goes up each time. The layer height, layer thickness can vary. 100 microns, you can see visible lines at 100 microns. You might think that 100 microns, 1/10 of a millimeter is pretty fine, but think about how big things are on a model kit. And you start looking and it's like, well, if you've got lines 1/10 of a millimeter on that, you can see them quite a lot. So if you go down to 0.25, sorry, 25 microns, which, and some, I think 25 is about the limit of most filament printers. I could be wrong because I've not really kept up with the cutting edge of filament because I've got resin. So resin starts at around 25 microns and can go lower. That's quadrupled your print time, right? Because it's doing 4 of those for every one. A modern resin printer, that's the way SLA printers used to work, because they used to use a laser to draw the line and then do that and solidify in the resin and then lift up and then draw. Now, because you've got a UV light source and then it's masked essentially by a phone screen, and it blocks out the light, you're exposing the entire layer at once. So generally, I mean, the 4K printer I have it's about a 3 to 6 second exposure time per layer. Whereas if you think if you're drawing around in physical space with a printer, that can be 30 seconds, a minute. It depends. If you're filling stuff in, that takes ages. So it's a lot longer. Whereas, especially if you've got something thin, if you can print something and angle it so it's quite, the height isn't much, the print time is only dependent on the height, right? So if you print a spear, say, or a barrel, if you printed something like this and you oriented it in the printer so it was like that, it's going to take, and you're dividing this, by 25 microns, that's how many layers it's got to do. Whereas if you can lay it like that, it's got to do 5 millimeters as opposed to whatever that is, 6-7 centimeters. So it's the same object. Whereas that's not quite as true with filament, because it has to draw out the whole thing regardless of its orientation. So there we go. 1/6 figure on FDM printer was 24 hours of printing time. I did not dare to use a 0.2 nozzle. No. Yeah, whereas so a 1/6 scale figure, again, depending on orientation, on a resin printer will probably be about 13 hours, I expect. Something like that, about half the time, but with probably, 4 to 12 times the resolution. So again, it's you pays your money and you takes your choice thing. I'm gonna have a drink because I'm getting a bit, I'm still recovering from this damn cold. see, again, coming back to technology, the ability to brew beer and not have alcohol in it, so it still tastes like a beer, but it doesn't ruin your evening, because after a couple of beers you don't feel sleepy and you don't get a bit of a headache and all those other things. I think it's fantastic. It's a bit like the ability to, it's a bit like contraceptives, right? Having sex without having to have a pregnancy. All the benefits with none of the side effects. That's perhaps one of the worst analogies I will use on this show. Question. It's for the head of likes of David Sterling. I think that's a comment rather than a question. Rubbish modeler. In a world where AI is doing everything for us, surely a self-build model is the way forward. I hope not. Dear. I mean, you can get 3D printers now, which combine an inkjet printer, and this has been for a while, actually. It's been for a few years. They can combine an FDM filament printer with an inkjet printer. So basically it paints it as well as printing it. So the miniature, I mean, it's mainly for like miniatures, but it can be anything. So basically it prints, it's done. When it comes out, there's no finishing on it. It's just, there we go. There's your thing. It's like, but on one level, that's good. That's cool, right? It's expensive, but that's cool. I can see, if you're a war gamer, for instance, I can see the appeal of that, right? I want 3 tigers for a game tomorrow. I can just print them out and do the camo for them all at once. Bam. Yeah, that's cool. But we shouldn't forget that the modeling is a hobby. It's a pastime. What is the purpose of a pastime? It's in the name. It's to pass the time. Why do we want to pass time? It's not about passing time. We can't stop the flow of time yet. Again, we don't have that technology. But it's about the pleasurable passing of time. So the enjoyment. If something's doing it for you, it's not really much of an enjoyment, is it? Some things, like doing the washing up, if somebody else is doing that for you, I get that there is enjoyment in that. But it's the enjoyment of absence, right? It's the enjoyment of not having to do a chore. That's not quite the same in modeling. I guess having an AI or a robot build my mini art tracks for me, yeah, I would do that. Yeah, because that's not necessarily an enjoyable part of a model for me, is putting together 1,000 links, or 200 links, each made out of 5 pieces. It's like, yeah, that does feel more like a chore than a pleasurable hobby. But good to see you, Julian. Have fun. If they did a 0% speckled hen, I'd buy some. So until then, I have to deal with the hangover. Yeah, that's fair enough. And there are some times, right, just with everything, we said you pay your money, you take your choice. Sometimes I'll have an actual beer because it's like the flavor of the beer that I enjoy. I'm with friends. I want to enjoy the whole social experience that can be shared with that. Again, it's a pay your money, you take your choice. That should also probably be on a mug from me. It depends, and it's up to you. Those are kind of my 2 mantras, I think, with modeling. Now, I have been rabbiting on and answering questions. I think it's probably about time I actually showed you where we are up to with the app. So I now have 2 screens, so I'm able to work on this while still having the screen on, which is fantastic. Now, how I actually share that could be interesting. So I think I need to share the entire screen of this side. Yes, I think this will work. Let me just maximize that window. There. How about that? And you can see the mouse. So this is, just let me go back to here. So this is the Paint Mixer app. So as you can see here, we have a drop down at the top here. Don't worry about the position of everything. Parts of this are likely to change. But this is kind of the hide the sharing button below. Oh, yes. Thank you. Glad the chat is keeping me on my toes. Keep it up. So we can choose which paints we want to use at the moment. We have ICM acrylics. So we have volume and mass ratio. Again, this will likely change in the future so that you can choose range and then mass volume. Some will be grayed out if we don't have that option. So obviously volume is easier, right? In terms of, you can measure out things either with a pipette or with a brush or by eye or whatever, but it's less accurate, right? Mass ratio, obviously, if you've got a little jeweler's scale, they're only about 15 pounds, then you can very accurately weigh out paint. But I'm sure a lot of people aren't prepared to do that. So we have both options. ICM is the only full range of modelers paints here at the moment, which is what we'll probably be beta testing on. Tamiya, we have most of the paints up to about, I think it's like XF60, but not the X paints, like the gloss ones, which means we do miss out things like pink. And then we've got the lacquers, which I can't really comment on because I don't currently have the lacquers. The reason I don't have the lacquers is, the reason I don't have the lacquers in the shop at the moment is down to, would you believe it, racks. The racks that Tamiya use are really hard to get. So, yeah. I would love to expand the range of Tamiya paints I have, but the racks apparently are made in Italy. They're not made by, they're not made in Japan, and I don't know. I think there's one guy, who lives in Palermo or something in Sicily, who welds them by hand or something. It's but anyway. Then we also have some. I mentioned artist paints before here. Liquitex Basic and Golden Acrylics. If any of you have ever used Liquitex or Golden products, they're really good. They're really good. I'd recommend you try some of them if you have a reason to, or you can pick them up. Usually they're more expensive because they're bigger volumes. But actually, in terms of what you get, the bang for your buck, they're probably the best value things that you can buy. You also then have this part, custom paint sets, which I think is one of the best additions we put in recently. Casey's done all the work on the coding here. Of course, I just say, "Oh, would it be possible to do?" And then she says yes, usually. So we can edit a paint set. So I can, for instance, I'm going to take here the MMM RAF set, and you can see we've got the colors in there that I have for mixing the RAF paints. So as part of the research, when I'm going through it and I get my kind of paints together, I'll show you actually how I kind of go about it now. It's a little bit different from how I used to do it. But I can add them to this. So as I'm going along, I can say, okay, deep orange is a common one. I'll add that on, and then I can go back and do stuff. I'm not going to do that right now, but let's just get a paint. I just need to move my microphone slightly. Let's do one I've not really done. Extra dark sea green. Okay. So extra dark sea green. I'll point now to a few things on this side of the screen. So we have the DE value, the DE 2000. This is the CIE lab color difference based on how different our sample paint, which at the moment is just pure white, obviously, to our target. So we have ours on the left, target on the right. And we see all our target information is here at the top. So it has the L, the A, and the B value. So the L is how light it is, the A, that red-green. So if it's positive, it's red. If it's negative, it's green. This is -6, meaning it's a little bit green. And then we have the B value, which is how yellow or blue it is. Yellow is, positive is yellow, negative is blue. This is 2.68, meaning it's a slightly yellow-green. Okay. And it's a kind of a mid-tone, about a 40, sort of a dark mid-tone. Dark color would be kind of 20 to 30, mid-tone kind of up to about 50-ish, and then light tone kind of above that. Roughly speaking, it changes a bit, but again, you kind of start to get a feel for different colors and things. So that's what we're trying to mix to. Now, down here, you'll see I picked out, we have a bunch of references here that Casey's put in, and a lot of this data is the meat and potatoes of this, right? So we've got all these different things. So you can choose, RAL classic colors and all this kind of stuff. There's a Thomas Chory book. We're using the RAF colors, British Aviation Colors of World War II, the blue version of the book. Obviously, it has the color chits in the back. And then we just selected the color from this list. So we have preset targets in here, which is absolutely brilliant. If you have your own researched target, you can actually enter it manually here. So you can see I've got some values here. I can set that as a target. That's my target here. This is a blue. And it will construct an artificial spectrum. So this isn't a real spectrum. This is a reconstructed one. It's the best that there's various ways of doing it. I won't go into all of that because we've only got a quarter of an hour left. But if you see, when I go to the selected target and I actually have to select something. So this is the actual spectrum of this green, right? You can see it's not reflecting a lot of light across the whole spectrum here. Yeah, it's less than, so about 15% tops. Its peak here is about 525 nanometers, something like that. Very little reflectance on the high wavelengths. So this is the red end of the spectrum. So you wouldn't expect it to be reflecting a lot of red light because it doesn't look red. It looks green, which is the opposite of that. And not reflecting a huge amount down at the low end, which is the blue end of the spectrum. So pretty much what you'd expect. Then we have this little bit at the right here. You can see we have here. I'll actually go from the bottom up. So the desired error threshold. So how good do we want the... Oh, go away. I don't want... Oh, dear God. Microsoft, bugger off. So how good do we want the match to be? So let's set that at 1. The default is 0.5, which is a really good match. We'll just set it at 1, which is still a very good match. The maximum number of paint parts in the mix. So this is a really useful parameter, right? Because we can limit how many paints, not how many paints, sorry, how many parts. So a 1-to-1 mix would be 2 parts, right? A 1-to-2 mix of 2 paints would be 3 parts. So you need a little bit of like getting your mind into it here, this. So if I want to see, if I want to see what is the closest paint that I have in the ICM range to this, I'm going to put the search width down to 100 because it's faster. The lower that number is, the faster it will be, the less precise it'll be. right? 200 is a default because that tries to avoid metameric matches. But for this purposes, doesn't matter because we're just going for the closest paint. Calculate paint mix, and it will, you see, pretty quickly because we're searching for the closest one, right? The closest one is extra dark green, which is, Kel Surprise, right? So that's the nearest match we've got in the ICM paint range to this color. So the way that I often approach this is this way, right? I'll start like this, and then I'll go, okay, if I increase that to 2 parts, what's the nearest mix now? So it takes a little bit longer. And straight away, right, we got down from how close was that match before? 7.62, which is a pretty obvious difference for anybody, right? To 1.18, which is very close. Yeah. So a lot of people, most people, will find that fairly difficult to distinguish. And that's matching the 2 colors together. So one of the things you have to remember here is when this is next to another color, say a camouflage color, and you have the actual thing next to the actual other camouflage color, it's going to be very much harder. So I generally aim for about 1, because less than that, it's like, well, that's good, but it's probably going to get a lot more complex. I usually will then go to, okay, the next one up, go to 3. How much better is it as a match? 0.96. Is it worth introducing another extra color to get that extra bit of differential? It depends, right? Sometimes it will be. Sometimes that is enough, right? The other thing, and I just did see somebody make a comment here. I'm not interested in the reflective curve graph, maybe for the advanced user. Well, maybe, but this gives you some clues, right? And I think we probably need to, we may need to label this, Casey, or maybe put a color thing in here about what these wavelengths, because you and I obviously just thinking wavelengths. Most people probably won't, probably thinking colors. So we might need to define that in terms of color. But if you wanted to mix your own color, for instance, so if I'm just doing this from scratch, and if I scroll down, you'll see we do have a little reset button here. So I click that reset. If I want to do this myself, right, I don't want the app to help me. And I know that, or I've only got a certain amount of paints, for instance. I know that extra dark green is, this actually isn't a great example. We'll stick with it. I'm going to add green oak to it. I can see that at the top end, we're matching that spectra. We're pretty good. But I might want to boost these areas, the sort of 450 to 550 area a bit. Again, if you've got more of a differential, let's try a lighter color actually, just to illustrate my point. Let's try, light green's not really. Sky blue, yeah, let's do sky blue. You can see the spectrum on this because it's a very reflective color. Okay, here we go. So here we have the reflectance curve. The blue one is our target. Again, we probably need to label those, Casey. The red one is our target. And you can see the red one is basically reflecting evenly across this spectrum. Yeah. Whereas to match to that curve, we want to pull it down in this lower area, right? Because we want to absorb that. So it gives you clues about what paint might be suitable or more suitable for that area if you want to do your own mixing. So again, if you want to use the tool to learn about this mixing, to improve your own mixing rather than just, I'll get a computer to do it, then that's a possibility, right? Let me just add a second part to this, get it to calculate. So we're at 6D. That's got it to 2.89. So now you can see the graphs here at the 400 to 550. They match pretty well there, but there's a big discrepancy at the 600 to 700 nanometer range, right? And it's saying it's 2 green. So this is the other little thing at the top here. It's 2 green. Now we know in the CIE lab color space, you've got red opposite the green. So probably needs to be a bit redder. Now, that doesn't mean you add red, right? I'm not going to go, if I go and add red, what's going to happen? It turns pink, yeah? Oh, it's too dark and it's too red now. But you've got to add something with a bit more, or rather, again, you can look at the values here. You see A is minus 4.24 on the target. It's minus 6.54 here. So we want to bring something, we want to bring that up towards 0, right? Whereas our B value, minus 3.55, so it's a little bit blue. Ours is a little bit too blue, minus 4.35. So how can we change that? Well, we could add more white, right? And you can see now we've added more white. And it's kind of helped in some areas and hasn't in others. So you can see adding white to something doesn't necessarily just lighten a color, right? It can change. So now we've got minus 6 and minus 3.59. So we've changed 2 things, not just one. So hopefully you can kind of start to see, at least the way my mind works. But of course, if you want it to be easy, you can just keep increasing this number. So we've got 2.2. So we were 6, then 2.2. Now we're at 1.59. You see now those graphs are matching much more closely. It's just really in this sort of 625 to 700 nanometer range that we've got the discrepancy. So you can see it says matches target because it's 1.59, and those discrepancies are pretty small across the board, right? It's mainly in the A value again. I increase that to 4. So, and that introduced another color as well, by the way. Yep. Now you see we've got a 0.87. You can see our values were minus 4.93 now. And that's because it added another volume of that white gray in. So if I roll that back to 2, it was just adding white and blue gray. So to get to where we were at 3, what it's doing is adding, well, we can just do it ourselves, right? It was just adding a volume of white gray, and then adding another volume of white gray brings it closer into line. So what I was doing prior to this was basically manually doing each of these steps on Excel. And then mixing and painting and measuring to see what the result was. So even if I am the only user worldwide of this tool, I owe Casey a whole crate of beer or wine or whatever it is, a meal, because the amount of labor saving for me personally that this has done is fantastic. So if it can help others in the same way, great. I've also learned a lot while I've been doing this, and hopefully I've kind of imparted some of that to you guys. It can do it all itself. Of course, you can just go with the defaults. The problem, and it's not really a problem, but these are the defaults, right? 200 search depth, which means it's going to, just think about it, the bigger that number is, the more things it's going to try. Maximum number of paints in the mix, I put 10, and desired error threshold is 0.5. If I calculate there, it's going to think about it a lot more. So it's going to use a lot more processor time. And remember, before I talked a little bit about the app, phone-based app might not be possible because my PC is, it's a year or so old. It's pretty high. It's a gaming spec PC. And you can see how long it's taking. It's multi-threading it. And it's taking a while to think about this. Something that we managed to get a match of less than 1 pretty much instantly. So now that's improved it to 0.47, which it is basically indistinguishable from the same color. If you look, the differences here, it's 0.5 in blue yellow, it's 0.06 difference in A, and about 0.2 in lightness. Again, those three are coordinates, so it's not an additive mix of those, it's how close it is in space, 3D space. 7 parts of white grey, 2 of blue grey, and 1 of white. And you can see small discrepancies in the spectrum. So if you were to view this in very blue light, you might see more of a discrepancy. But you're not supposed to do that, right? So that is it, kind of in a nutshell. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a taste. As I say, if you are interested in being part of the beta test of that, that's going to be through my my YouTube membership and Patreons. So probably be a week or so. Don't hang your washing out to dry or not do anything waiting for it, because I'm making no promises on that. It depends on various factors. But it'd be interesting to see people's feedback when it gets out in the wild, because obviously Casey and I have been living with this for a while now, so we are blind to its problems, I'm sure. So let me just have a quick look and make sure I've not missed anything here. Brian said, I'd like to see it made more idiot-proof, i.e. put a coloured box around each section in the order it needs to be completed, or grey out sections so that only the next step is active. So I don't know whether we would do that, Brian, because it's not meant to be used by idiots. I'm being glib. I don't mean that. It's more about that, again, this is a tool. It's not necessarily a tool for somebody to just go and say, I want this paint, and it just does that. It can do that, but if you don't know anything about paint, not that you don't know anything about paint, if you aren't prepared to put the time in to kind of do the research in the first place, because a lot of this is about what data are you using, what is the reference you're using, then you're probably not going to be the kind of person that would use this anyway. So I'm not sure we want to dumb it down. I get what you're saying, and I agree. I think user friendliness is definitely something that will come in that. I think it's more about how it's documented, the user guide, if you like, because at the end of the day, this is a pretty sophisticated tool. At the end of the day, because you're measuring spectral and matching spectral absorbances. It's not just like the other paint apps that are out there, which, if you've tried them, they are garbage. I know, because I've tried them. One last thing I will say, actually, is we've also got other paint ranges in there as well. So, for instance, if you've got ICM paints and you've got Vallejo paints, and you're missing a Vallejo, you're painting something in Vallejo paints, and you're missing a Vallejo paint, and you need to get it finished today because there's a competition tomorrow or something, you've got ICM paints, you can mix the ICM paints to a Vallejo paint. So, but let me just show you that just before I go. So here we go, Vallejo Air. Oh my God, I've been painting this thing in middle stone, and it's just like, oh my God, my middle stone's run out, and I've only got these ICM paints left. How do I patch up my P40 that's in dark earth and middle stone? Well, there we go. You just mix buff and British khaki together, and that matches your Vallejo Model Air color, imperceptibly, which is pretty neat, right? That's not to say that the Vallejo color is accurate, right? This is about making a paint which matches. So I think that's quite neat in itself. And when Casey first said you put all those in, I was just like, why would you want to mix one paint to another? And I thought, no, actually, that's quite clever. It's probably cleverer than I was thinking. So it's a nice little feature, I think, being able to match to other paint ranges, because exactly as I just said, if you run out of something, need to patch something up, or you just want to be consistent with how things look compared to each other. I think that's quite nice. So anyway, that's kind of all I've got for tonight. And if you liked what we spoke about tonight, if you'd like to see us expand on any particular aspects of the Paint app, I'll go over this in more detail on Sunday. Got a private member stream on Sunday night. I'll talk about this a bit more and show a bit about what I've been doing and some of the future stuff. So head on over if you want to join the YouTube channel. Preferable to Patreon. Patreon's a bit of a pain in the ass, but I appreciate however you can support the channel. It is fantastic. It allows us to do stuff like this. So otherwise, please comment down below if you're watching this after the live stream. Say what you think of it, say what you'd like to see, and any other comments or questions that you've had will be welcome. I'm going to finish my 0% alcohol beer now. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, everybody. Cheers now.